Welcome to the HBR IdeaCast. From Harvard Business Review, I'm Sarah Green. I'm here today with Vijay Govindarajan of the Tuck School of Business, co-author of The Other Side of Innovation, Solving the Execution Challenge with Chris Trimble. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So you and your co-author, Chris Trimble, opened the book talking about Mount Rainier. And now I'm actually an active hiker myself. So tell me, what does innovation have to do with mountain climbing?
You see, the interesting thing is, in mountain climbing, people focus on getting to the top of the mountain. That's exciting, exhilarating. You think you've achieved it, but then the real challenge starts as you coming down, because there is plenty of dangers in coming down, and they're not well prepared. And the book is about, we focus on innovation too much on one side of innovation, which is coming up with great ideas. But the real challenge turns out to be on the other side of innovation, which is how do you make it happen? The greatest innovator of all time, Thomas Alva Edison, put it nicely. Innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And that 1% inspiration is the idea, creativity. People mistake innovation for creativity. Innovation is not creativity. Innovation is commercializing creativity. That's the 99% perspiration. That's the other side of climbing the mountain, is getting to the 1%, but the 99% is coming down. That's what this book is about, the 99% perspiration.
And you actually describe this execution plan in two parts. Just tell us quickly, what are those two parts of execution?
You see, the first part is really the team that is going to do the innovation has to be somewhat separate from what we call the core business or the performance engine. So the dedicated team has to be separated from performance engine. But at the same time, the dedicated team draws upon certain key resources from performance engine. Therefore, it has to be a partnership. Partnership between dedicated team and some part of the performance engine which is supporting that innovation. That's part one of the book. How do you create and manage that partnership? The second part of the book is every innovation is an experiment. And therefore, experiments have unknown outcomes. And how do you manage experiments when there is so much enormous uncertainty? Therefore, we come up with a concept called how do you amplify weak signals? Because signals about the future is always weak on day one. Then the question is, how do you move in that future? You have two options. One, wait for the signals to be crystal clear before you act. I wish we could do that, but the game may be over by then. So then the question is, how do you amplify weak signals yourself, which is all about testing assumptions. That's part two of the book. How do you test assumptions about the future? So the first part of the book is how do you create the partnership between the dedicated team and the performance engine, the organizational question. The second part is how do you test assumptions? Thereby you can amplify weak signals yourself.
Well, let's focus on part one first. What is so different about creating this kind of team that's different from creating other kinds of innovation teams or ideation teams in an organization?
You see, you're absolutely right. We create ideation teams, which is essentially to come up and brainstorm and come up with ideas. So they get into a dark room, dance, and see something interesting will pop up. And there is a lot of focus on that. And that is the creativity part. And I'm not saying that is unimportant, but I have now worked with hundreds of companies and thousands of executives. What I find is companies don't lack for ideas. What they really lack is their inability to commercialize those ideas. So what we are talking about is how do you create some separation between the core business, which is the performance engine, and this dedicated team, which is critical in executing the innovation with partnership with performance engine. The reason why we need that separation is the skills that are required in innovation. By definition, there has to be some new skills. If there are no new skills in execution, then that's not an innovation by definition. So you have to create those new skills in a separate area. And the second reason you need the separation is partly you have to forget the past if you want to create the future. Innovation is about creating the future. And in order to create the future, you have to selectively give up something that you're doing. And if you keep it too much in the performance engine, they will have tough time forgetting. So it is the forgetting challenge and building capabilities. That's what requires the separation.
Do you think building that separation is the biggest challenge in terms of creating these teams, or is there another pitfall that you see frequently?
I think the pitfall falls into three categories. The first is trying to understand what part of the job has to be done by the performance engine, what part of the job has to be done by the dedicated team. That's the first challenge. Dividing the task between the dedicated team performance engine. That's the first challenge. Second challenge is to really build that dedicated team, which requires new skills. Many times people transfer folks from performance engine into the dedicated team, then they are not forgetting things. The same organizational memory goes there. Therefore, we need to think about hiring people from the outside or acquiring a company with those capabilities. So second problem is really building the competency of the dedicated team. The third is managing the partnership, because inevitably there is going to be conflict. The very reason you're separating the dedicated team is because the performance engine cannot do it. But yet they have to work together. And therefore, how do you manage that partnership? That's the third challenge.
Earlier you mentioned weak signals and the need to amplify them. Once you have this team in place, how do you go about making sure the people on that team are paying attention to the right signals?
Yeah. Let me take an example from the book. IBM they wanted to create the fastest computer in the world. As you well know, in the 90s, IBM was looked down upon because the action was in Silicon Valley. Everybody thought if you have to go to Silicon Valley for getting this high tech. And IBM wanted to show that it also is as cool as a Silicon Valley company. And if you remember right, in the mid or late 90s, they even created Deep Blue, which is a computer which beat Garry Kasparov in a chess match. So they wanted to create that kind of cool products that IBM can be at the cutting edge of technology. Therefore, they wanted to create the fastest computer in the world. That's another cool product, supercomputer, 1,000 times faster than the supercomputer that was available at that time. Now, if you want to create a 1,000 times faster computer, the speed in the computer is based on microprocessor. But they didn't want to go that route, because if you build a very powerful microprocessor that can operate a supercomputer 1,000 times faster than what we have today, you need a couple of power plants to operate that computer, because the electricity consumption will be so huge. The cost of electricity will be more than the cost of the supercomputer. So they wanted to come up with a radical innovation. So they said, instead of building a more powerful microprocessor, let us actually slow down the speed of microprocessor, but take thousands and thousands of commodity chips and try to somehow connect them. And in the process of connecting them, we will create the speed. Now, this is called massive parallel computing. This massive parallel computing as a concept people have written about in theory, but nobody knew this could work. So this is what I call a weak signal. They didn't know whether by connecting these commodity chips you can speed up the computer. Now, in order to do this, the team, what it said was, let us figure out whether the speed of the machine will increase with the number of commodity chips that are added. Now, the real complication here is the commodity chips have to talk to each other. Therefore, if you put a lot of commodity chips together, that communication may create network congestion. So they didn't know how many chips it takes, because there is a nonlinear relationship between the number of chips and the speed of the machine because of the network congestion, the communication congestion problem. So the team, what it did was, let us conduct small experiments. That's what amplifying weak signals is all about. Conduct small experiments. Spend a little, learn a lot. So they started with 2 commodity chips. Then they doubled it to 4. Then they doubled it to 8, to see at what point actually the speed of the machine actually goes down with increased number of commodity chips because of the network congestion. They thought 512 chips, that's the theory that people said, beyond 512 commodity chips, the machine will come to a grinding halt. When they hit 512 chips, it was still performing and the speed was higher. The team was quite excited. And by this process of experimentation, they ended up with Blue Gene, because this kind of a machine is useful for genetics, where you need very fast machines. Blue Gene is the computer, which has got 64,000 commodity chips. So this is the kind of experimentation. If they started with 64,000, they didn't know the answer would be that. But you need to start with small experiments and amplify those signals.
Your research spanned 2 recessions. How did that affect your conclusions?
In fact, it's interesting. The recessions made the conclusions and the relevance of the book even stronger. I have been actually studying recessions for the last 100 years because recessions are nothing new. And I came up with 3 conclusions. The 3 conclusions are, first is, recessions are always followed by expansion. While that may be obvious, what is less obvious is expansion lasts longer than recession. Even if you take the Great Depression, it was 29, 30, 31, half of 32, followed by 10 years of expansion. Or the dot-com debacle, 16 months of disaster followed by 7 years of expansion. So the first thing is, expansion is more robust and lasts longer than recession. The second is, after the recession is over, there is fundamental change in the competitive landscape in almost all industries. There are new winners and new losers. If you take a look at the dot-com debacle, for instance, after the dot-com debacle was over, 10% of the companies disappeared. Boom, they're gone. And 60% of the companies just survived. And 30% of the companies became high performers after the recession. Now, the question that leads to the third point, which is, what do those 30% of the companies do that the 60% don't do? Not to speak of the 10% who disappear. And the 30% of the companies focus on investing in innovation and growth during recession. The best time to prepare for expansion is during recession. And therefore, our book was in 2 recessions, and what we found repeatedly is companies which became strong. Because in our sample, we had successful and not so successful companies. And the not so successful companies didn't focus on growth and innovation during recession, whereas the successful companies did. Therefore, this was a very powerful lesson for us as we embarked on this research during 2 major recessions.
You talk in the book about part of this process as being like building a new company from scratch. How is it not like building a new company from scratch?
It is very much like building a new company from the scratch for one reason, and that is, if this innovation, suppose you take this blue jean as an example, if this innovation was done by a Silicon Valley startup, they will not replicate what was there inside IBM. They will start with a clean slate and build the capabilities. IBM should think of the problem the same way. How do we build a team from the ground up? However, IBM has one big advantage, which is they have existing capabilities, existing assets, which a pure startup doesn't have. Therefore, building a new company, you have to deviate to the extent that you can draw upon from your performance engines. That's what a Silicon Valley startup does not have. See, my whole bias in my 35 years of research is how to make large companies innovative. How can elephants do dance? And because one thing large companies have is tremendous resources. And I believe humanity faces very big problems, very big challenges, and they can be tackled only by big companies like GE or IBM or P&G or PepsiCo. And the question is, while they have tremendous resources, they also have these organizational traps. And how do you overcome those traps so that big companies with tremendous resources, not financial alone, but technology and so on and so forth, how they can unlock and solve these big problems humanity faces?
Well, it's a big challenge and a very complex topic, and unfortunately that's all the time we have to get into it today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's Vijay Govindarajan, and the book is The Other Side of Innovation. For more, go to hbr.org.